Dolaire's Book of Greek Myths by Ingrid and Edgar Dolaire. In olden times, when men still worshipped ugly idols, there lived in the land of Greece a folk of shepherds and herdsmen who cherished light and beauty. They did not worship dark idols like their neighbors, but created instead their own beautiful, radiant gods. The Greek gods looked much like people and acted like them too, only they were taller, handsomer, and could do no wrong. Fire-breathing monsters and beasts with many heads stood for all that was dark and wicked. They were for gods and great heroes to conquer. The gods lived on top of Olympus, a mountain so high and steep that no man could climb it and see them in their shining palace. But they often descended to earth, sometimes in their own shapes, sometimes disguised as humans or animals. Mortals worshipped the gods, and the gods honored Mother Earth. They had all sprung from her, for she was the beginning of all life. Gaia, the earth, came out of darkness so long ago that nobody knows when or how. Earth was young and lonesome, for nothing lived on her yet. Above her rose Uranus, the sky, dark and blue, set all over with sparkling stars. He was magnificent to behold, and young Earth looked up at him and fell in love with him. Sky smiled down at Earth, twinkling with his countless stars, and they were joined in love. Soon young Earth became Mother Earth, the mother of all things living. All her children loved their warm and bountiful mother and feared their mighty father Uranus, Lord of the universe. The Titans. The Titans were the first children of Mother Earth. They were the first gods, taller than the mountains she created to serve them as thrones, and both earth and sky were proud of them. There were 6 Titans, 6 glorious gods, and they had 6 sisters, the Titanesses, whom they took for their wives. When Gaia again gave birth, Uranus was not proud. Their new children were also huge, but each had only one glowing eye set in the middle of his forehead. They were the 3 Cyclops, and they were named Lightning, Thunder, and Thunderbolt. They were not handsome gods, but tremendously strong smiths. Sparks from their heavy hammers flashed across the sky and lit up the heavens so brightly that even their father's stars faded. After a while, Mother Earth bore 3 more sons. Uranus looked at them with disgust. Each of them had 50 heads and 100 strong arms. He hated to see such ugly creatures walk about on lovely earth. So he seized them and their brothers the Cyclops and flung them into Tartarus, the deepest, darkest pit under the earth. Mother Earth loved her children and could not forgive her husband for his cruelty to them. Out of hardest flint she fashioned a sickle and spoke to her sons, the Titans. Take this weapon, make an end to your father's cruelty, and set your brothers free. Fear took hold of 5 of the Titans, and they trembled and refused. Only Cronus, the youngest but the strongest, dared to take the sickle. He fell upon his father. Uranus could not withstand the weapon wielded by his strong son, and he fled, giving up his powers. Mother Earth made Pontus, the boundless sea, her second husband, and from this union sprang the gods of the watery depths. And from her rich ground grew an abundance of trees and flowers, and out of her crevices sprites, beasts, and early man crept forth. Cronus was now lord of the universe. He sat on the highest mountain and ruled over heaven and earth with a firm hand. The other gods obeyed his will, and early man worshipped him. This was man's golden age. Men lived happily and in peace with the gods and each other. They did not kill, and they had no locks on their doors, for theft had not yet been invented. But Cronus did not set his monstrous brothers free, and Mother Earth was angry with him and plotted his downfall. She had to wait, for no god yet born was strong enough to oppose him. But she knew that one of his sons would be stronger than he, just as Cronus had been stronger than his father. Cronus knew it too, so every time his Titaness wife Rhea gave birth, he took the newborn god and swallowed it. With all of his offspring securely inside him, he had nothing to fear. But Rhea mourned. Her 5 sisters, who had married the 5 other Titans, were surrounded by their Titan children, while she was all alone. When Rhea expected her 6th child, she asked Mother Earth to help her save her child from his father. That was just what Mother Earth had been waiting for. She gave her daughter whispered advice, and Rhea went away smiling. As soon as Rhea had borne her child, the god Zeus, she hid him. Then she wrapped a stone in baby clothes and gave it to her husband to swallow instead of her son. Cronus was fooled and swallowed the stone, and the little god Zeus was spirited away to a secret cave on the island of Crete. Old Cronus never heard the cries of his young son, for Mother Earth set noisy earth sprites outside the cave. They made such a clatter, beating their shields with their swords, that other sounds were drowned out. Zeus and his family. Zeus was tended by gentle nymphs and was nursed by the fairy goat Amathalia. From the horns of the goat flowed ambrosia and nectar, the food and drink of the gods. Zeus grew rapidly, and it was not long before he strode out of the cave as a great new god. To thank the nymphs for tending him so well, he gave them the horns of the goat. They were horns of plenty and could never be emptied. From the hide of the goat he made for himself an impenetrable breastplate, the Aegis, and now he was so strong that Cronos could do nothing against him. Young Zeus chose Midas, a Titan's daughter, for his first wife. She was the goddess of prudence, and he needed her good advice. She warned him not to try alone to overthrow his child-devouring father, for Cronus had all the other Titans and their sons on his side. First, Zeus must also have strong allies. Midas went to Cronus and cunningly tricked him into eating a magic herb. He thought that the herb would make him unconquerable. Instead, it made him so sick that he vomited up not only the stone he had swallowed, but his 5 other children as well. They were the gods Hades and Poseidon, and the goddesses Hestia, Demeter, and Hera, all mighty gods who right away joined forces with Zeus. When Cronus saw the 6 young gods rising against him, he knew that his hour had come, and he surrendered his powers and fled. Now Zeus was Lord of the universe. He did not want to rule alone. He shared his powers with his brothers and sisters. But the Titans and their sons revolted. They refused to let themselves be ruled by the new gods. Only Prometheus and his brother Epimetheus left the Titans to join Zeus, for Prometheus could look into the future, and he knew that Zeus would win. Zeus freed the monstrous sons of Mother Earth from Tartarus. Gratefully, the 100-armed ones fought for him with all their strength, and the Cyclops forged mighty weapons for him and his brothers. They made a trident for Poseidon. It was so forceful that when he struck the ground with it, the earth shook, and when he struck the sea, frothing waves stood mountain high. For Hades, they made a cap of invisibility, so he could strike his enemies unseen. And for Zeus, they forged lightning bolts. Armed with them, he was the mightiest god of them all. Nothing could stand against him and his thunderbolts. The Titans fought a bitter battle, but at last they had to surrender, and Zeus locked them up in Tartarus. The 100 armed monsters went to stand guard at the gates to see that they never escaped. Atlas, the strongest of the Titans, was sent to the end of the world to carry forever the vault of the sky on his shoulders. Angry with Zeus for sending her sons the Titans into the dark pit of Tartarus, Mother Earth now brought forth two terrible monsters, Typhon and his mate Echidna, and sent them against Zeus. They were so fearful that when the gods saw them, they changed themselves into animals and fled in terror. Typhon's 100 horrible heads touched the stars. Venom dripped from his evil eyes, and lava and red-hot stones poured from his gaping mouths. Hissing like 100 snakes and roaring like 100 lions, he tore up whole mountains and threw them at the gods. Zeus soon regained his courage and turned. And when the other gods saw him taking his stand, they came back to help him fight the monster. A terrible battle raged, and hardly a living creature was left on earth. But Zeus was fated to win, and as Typhon tore up huge Mount Etna to hurl at the gods, Zeus struck it with 100 well-aimed thunderbolts, and the mountain fell back, pinning Typhon underneath. There the monster lies to this very day, belching fire, lava, and smoke through the top of the mountain. Echidna, his hideous mate, escaped destruction. She cowered in a cave, protecting Typhon's dreadful offspring, and Zeus let them live as a challenge to future heroes. Now, at last, Mother Earth gave up her struggle. There were no more upheavals, and the wounds of the war soon healed. The mountains stood firmly anchored, the seas had their shores, the rivers had their riverbeds, and ox-horned river gods watched over them, and each tree and each spring had its nymph. The earth again was green and fruitful, and Zeus could begin to rule in peace. The one-eyed Cyclops were not only smiths, but masons as well, and they built a towering palace for the gods on top of Mount Olympus, the highest mountain in Greece. The palace was hidden in clouds, and the goddesses of the seasons rolled them away whenever a god wanted to go down to earth. Nobody else could pass through the gate of clouds. Iris, the fleet-footed messenger of the gods, had her own path down to earth. Dressed in a gown of iridescent drops, she ran along the rainbow on her busy errands between Olympus and earth. In the gleaming hall of the palace, where light never failed, the Olympian gods sat on 12 golden thrones and reigned over heaven and earth. There were 12 great gods, for Zeus shared his powers not only with his brothers and sisters, but with 6 of his children and the goddess of love as well. Zeus himself sat on the highest throne with a bucket full of thunderbolts beside him. On his right sat his youngest sister Hera, whom he had chosen from all his wives as his queen. Beside her sat her son Ares, god of war, and Hephaestus, god of fire, with Aphrodite, goddess of love, between them. Next was Zeus's son Hermes, the herald of the gods, and Zeus's sister Demeter, goddess of the harvest, with her daughter Persephone on her lap. On the left of Zeus sat his brother Poseidon, the lord of the sea. Next to him sat the 4 children of Zeus, Athena, the twins Apollo and Artemis, and Dionysus, the youngest of the gods. Athena was the goddess of wisdom, Apollo the god of light and music, Artemis goddess of the hunt, and Dionysus the god of wine. Hestia, the eldest sister of Zeus, was goddess of the hearth. She had no throne, but tended the sacred fire in the hall, and every hearth on earth was her altar. She was the gentlest of all the Olympians. Hades, the eldest brother of Zeus, was the lord of the dead. He preferred to stay in his gloomy palace in the underworld and never went to Olympus. The gods themselves could not die, for divine ichor flowed in their veins instead of blood. Most of the time they lived happily together, feasting on sweet-smelling ambrosia and nectar, but when their wills clashed, there were violent quarrels. Then Zeus would reach for a thunderbolt and the Olympians would tremble and fall to order, for Zeus alone was stronger than all the other gods together. Pandora was modeled by Hephaestus in the likeness of Aphrodite. He carved her out of a block of white marble, made her lips of red rubies, and her eyes of sparkling sapphires. Athena breathed life into her and dressed her in elegant garments. Aphrodite decked her with jewels and fixed her red mouth in a winning smile. Into the mind of this beautiful creature Zeus put insatiable curiosity, and then he gave her a sealed jar and warned her never to open it. Hermes brought Pandora down to earth and offered her in marriage to Epimetheus, who lived among the mortals. Epimetheus had been warned by Prometheus never to accept a gift from Zeus, but he could not resist the beautiful woman. Thus Pandora came to live among mortals, and men came from near and far to stand awestruck by her wondrous beauty. But Pandora was not perfectly happy, for she did not know what was in that jar that Zeus had given her. It was not long before her curiosity got the better of her, and she had to take a quick peek. The moment she opened the lid, out swarmed a horde of miseries: greed, vanity, slander, envy, and all the evils that until then had been unknown to mankind. Horrified at what she had done, Pandora clapped the lid on, just in time to keep Hope from flying away too. Zeus had put Hope at the bottom of the jar, and the unleashed miseries would quickly have put an end to it. They stung and bit the mortals as Zeus had planned, but their sufferings made them wicked instead of good as Zeus had hoped. They lied, they stole, and they killed each other and became so evil that Zeus, in disgust, decided to drown them in a flood. But there was one man on earth who had not turned evil. He was a son of Prometheus. His name was Deucalion. Echo was one of the nymphs with whom Pan fell in love. She was a happy nymph who chattered and prattled all day long and never kept quiet long enough for Pan to win her with music and poetry. One day, Hera came down from Olympus to look for Zeus. She suspected that he was playing with the nymphs, but Echo detained her so long with idle chatter that Zeus, who really was there, was able to sneak away. Hera, in a rage, punished Echo by taking from her the gift of forming her own words. From then on, poor Echo could only repeat the words of others. Now at last Pan thought he could win her by his words. But before he had a chance, she had lost her heart to another. He was Narcissus, and he was so handsome that every girl and every nymph he met fell in love with him. Unfortunately, he liked nobody but himself. Echo trailed silently behind Narcissus as he hunted in the woods, hoping to hear an endearing word from him that she could repeat. But he never so much as noticed her. At last, toward nightfall, they came to a quiet pool, and Narcissus was thirsty, and he bent down to drink. Suddenly, he stopped and stared, for in the mirroring surface of the water, he saw the handsomest face he had ever seen. He smiled, and the handsome face smiled back at him. Joyfully he nodded, and so did the stranger in the water. "I love you," said Narcissus to the handsome face. I love you, repeated Echo eagerly. She stood behind him, happy to be able to speak to him at last. But Narcissus neither saw nor heard her. He was spellbound by the handsome stranger in the water. He did not know that it was his own image that he had fallen in love with, and he sat smiling at himself, forgetting to eat, forgetting to drink, until he wasted away and died. Hermes came and led him down to the realm of the dead, but where he had been sitting, the lovely Narcissus flower sprang up. Echo stood beside the flower and grieved and pined until she too faded away. Nothing was left of Echo but her voice, which to this day can be heard senselessly repeating the words of others. Pan grieved for a while, but then another pretty nymph crossed his path, and he forgot all about Echo. Her name was Syrinx. King Midas was a kind but rather stupid man who had always been a friend to the Phrygian satyrs. One morning his servants had found an old satyr sleeping in the king's favorite flower bed. Midas had spared the satyr from punishment and let him go. This old satyr was a follower of Dionysus, and the god had rewarded Midas for his kindness by granting him a wish. Short-sightedly, King Midas wished that everything he touched would turn to gold. His golden touch made him the richest man on earth. But he almost starved to death, for even his food and drink turned to gold. And when his little daughter ran to hug him, she too turned into gold. Midas had to beg Dionysus to undo his wish and make everything as it had been before. Now again, King Midas showed poor judgment. The 9 muses all agreed that Apollo was by far the better musician, but Midas voted for the Phrygian satyr. Apollo disdainfully turned his lyre upside down and played just as well as before. He ordered Marsyas to turn his flute and do the same. Not a sound came from Marsyas' flute, however hard he blew, and even Midas had to admit that the satyr's flute was inferior to Apollo's lyre. So Marsyas lost the contest, and Apollo pulled off his skin and made a drum of it. Then he turned to King Midas and said, "Ears as stupid as yours belong to a donkey. Donkey's ears you shall have from now on." Ever after, King Midas went about with a tall peaked cap on his head to hide his long ears. His subjects thought he had started a new fashion, and it wasn't long before all of the Phrygians wore tall peaked caps. The king's barber was the only one who knew what Midas was hiding. He had been forbidden to breathe a word about it, and he almost burst from having to keep such an important secret. When he could bear it no longer, he ran out to a lonesome field, dug a hole in the ground, and whispered into it, "King Midas has donkey ears." He quickly covered up the hole and thought the secret was safe. But the nearby reeds had heard it, and as they swayed in the wind, they whisper, "Midas has donkey ears. Midas has donkey ears." And soon the secret spread all over the world. King Midas was so ashamed that he left his throne and hid deep in the woods where no one could see him. Heracles. Proudly did the Muses sing of Heracles, often called Hercules, the strongest man who ever lived on earth and the greatest of all of the descendants of Danaus. His mother was Princess Alcmena, granddaughter of Perseus and Andromeda, and famed for her beauty and virtue. His father was Zeus, so Hera, of course, hated Alcmena and pursued Heracles with her wrath. When he was an infant, the goddess sent 2 spotted serpents into his cradle, but little Heracles simply grasped them in his powerful hands and squeezed the life out of them. He grew stronger every day, But his trouble was that he did not know his own strength. Being of noble birth, he had to learn to sing and play the lyre. But Heracles would much rather wrestle and fight. One day his music teacher Linus scolded him for singing out of tune. In a fit of fury, Heracles banged his lyre over the teacher's head, harder than he had meant, and the blow killed the poor man. Heracles was too strong to have around a palace, so he was sent into the mountains as a shepherd. There he could use his tremendous strength on prowling beasts. Soon he had rid the countryside around Thebes of lions and wolves, and the fame of his strength spread far and wide. He came back from the mountains as a hero, and the king of Thebes regarded him so highly that he gave him his daughter in marriage. Hera did not like this at all, and she made Heracles insane. Raving mad, he swatted down his own children, mistaking them for wild beasts. When he regained his senses, he was horrified at what he had done, and went to the oracle of Delphi to learn what he must do to atone for his crime. He was told that he must serve for 10 years as the slave of his cousin Eurystheus and perform 10 labors for him. Hera was pleased, for Eurystheus, the king of Mycenae, was a weak little man who hated his strong cousin Heracles. With her help, the king would surely think of the hardest tasks for Heracles to perform. For his first 4 labors, Eurystheus sent Heracles to rid the nearby countryside of dangerous beasts and monsters. In the valley of Nemea dwelt a monstrous lion whose hide was so tough it could not be pierced by any weapons. It was one of Echidna's dreadful offspring, which Zeus had let live as a challenge to future heroes. Heracles chased it out of its lair, seized it in his bare hands, and squeezed it to death. Then he skinned the beast with its own claws, and with the impenetrable skin of the Nemean lion slung over his head and shoulders, he reported back to Eurystheus his first labor performed. In the swamps of Lerna there lived a 9-headed hydra, another of Echidna's brood. This monster was so poisonous that the fumes from its breath alone were enough to kill whatever came close to it. Heracles filled his enormous lungs with air, held his breath, and ran at the hydra. Swinging his club, he knocked off its heads, and one after another they rolled to the ground. But no sooner had he knocked off one head than a new one grew in its place. He half turned around and let out enough air to call to his charioteer to bring a firebrand and sear the necks. Then no new heads could sprout. When Hera saw that Heracles was winning over the hydra, she sent a giant crab to pinch his heel. With a mighty kick, Heracles sent the giant crab flying as he knocked off the last of the heads. Then he dipped his arrows in the hydra's blood, making them so poisonous that a mere scratch from them was deadly, and he returned to Mycenae, his second labor performed. On the slopes of Mount Erymanthus roamed a wild and dreadful boar with tusks as sharp as swords. Eurystheus sent Heracles to bring this beast back alive. With loud yells, Heracles chased the boar out of its lair and drove it ahead of him all the way to the top of the snow-capped mountain. The heavy beast sank into the snow, and it was easy for Heracles to catch and subdue it. He pushed, dragged, and rolled it all the way down to the gates of Mycenae. When Eurystheus saw the fearful boar, he dived into an urn and barely dared to peek out. Then Eurystheus sent Heracles to rid the Stymphalian lake of a swarm of dangerous birds. They had feathers of brass so sharp that when one of them fell to the ground, it killed whomever it hit. But they could not penetrate Heracles' lion's skin. And he made such a din with a huge rattle that the birds took fright and flew away, never to return. Eurystheus was distressed to see with what great ease Heracles had performed his first 4 labors. Now he sent him to bring back alive one of the sacred hinds of Artemis. He hoped that Heracles would harm the creature with his brute strength and thereby earn the wrath of the goddess. But Heracles pursued the swift deer with great patience over hills and dales. The year was almost over when at last he caught the deer. With great care he carried it back to Mycenae. Next, to humble his strong cousin, Eurystheus ordered Heracles to clean the stables of King Augeas, who lived across the mountains to the west. King Augeas had huge herds, and his stables and barnyards had not been cleaned for years. Heaps of dung rose mountain high. No man alive could clean his stables in a year, thought Eurystheus. But Heracles, with tremendous strength, changed the course of 2 rivers. The waters flooded through the stables and barnyards and washed them clean in less than a day. Eurystheus now, on the advice of Hera, sent Heracles far afield for his last 4 labors. He must travel all the way to the east and fetch back to Mycenae the golden girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons. The Amazons were a tribe of wild and warlike women who rode better and fought harder than any men. Eurystheus was sure that even Heracles would be overwhelmed by the furious women. But when Heracles arrived in Amazon land, the proud queen was so taken by the sight of his bulging muscles that she gave him her belt without a fight. She would gladly have given him her hand in the bargain, but Hera, in the disguise of an Amazon, spread the rumor that Heracles had come to kidnap Hippolyta. The Amazons threw themselves upon Heracles, but for once they had found their master. Heracles swung his mighty club, and the little Amazon husbands who were spinning and cooking and tending the babies were amazed to see their dangerous wives subdued by a single man. In triumph, Heracles returned to Mycenae with Hippolyta's belt. He could not bring the queen. She had been killed in the fight. Far to the north, there lived a king whose name was Diomedes. He was a very inhospitable king and had trained his 4 mares to devour all strangers who came to his land. Now Eurystheus sent Heracles to capture the 4 man-eating mares and bring them back alive. Heracles traveled to the north, slew King Diomedes, and threw him to his own mares. When the mares had eaten the evil king, they were so tame that they let Heracles drive them back to the gates of Mycenae. Then Eurystheus sent Heracles south to catch a fierce, fire-breathing bull on the island of Crete. The Cretans, who were great bullfighters, could not catch the bull. But Heracles seized the charging bull by the horns without heeding the flames from its nostrils, flung it to the ground, and returned to Mycenae, bringing the subdued beast. Eurystheus was glad he had a safe urn to hide in. For his 10th labor, Heracles was sent to an island far out in the ocean to bring back a huge herd of red cows. They belonged to Geryon, a monster with 3 bodies on 1 pair of legs. Heracles walked off with a powerful stride and soon reached the end of all land in the west. The only boat he could spot was the golden vessel of Helios, the sun. Heracles aimed his mighty bow at the sun and threatened to shoot him from the sky if he did not lend it to him. Helios did not dare to refuse, and he let Hercules take his golden boat. Before he sailed off, Heracles pulled up two huge crags and set them down, one on each side of the strait that separates Europe from Africa. There they stand to this day, called the Pillars of Hercules. When Heracles was out at sea and the waves rose high around him, he aimed a poisoned arrow at the waves, threatening to shoot them if they did not still at once. The waves flattened in fear, and Heracles sailed on to Gerion's island. He began at once to load the herd of red cows, and Gerion's watchman and his two-headed dog rushed at him. With one swing of his mighty club, Heracles did away with them both. Then Geryon himself came running to attack him, his three huge bodies swaying on his thin legs. Calmly, Heracles lifted his bow, took careful aim, and sent a poisoned arrow through all of the monster's three bodies. As time was getting short, Heracles rode back as fast as he could with the herd. When he arrived at the mainland, Hera sent a swarm of gadflies to sting the cows, and they scattered all over Europe. Still, Heracles managed to round them up and bring them to the gates of Mycenae just before the year was up. There, Eurystheus sacrificed the cows to Hera, and gratified, the goddess whispered into his ear that he must demand 2 more labors from Heracles, for his charioteer had helped him to singe the heads of the Hydra, and not he, but the waters of 2 rivers had washed the Aegean stables clean. Heracles scowled, but he bowed his head in submission, for he had won much glory on his 10 labors and hoped to win some more. For his 11th labor, Heracles was sent to find Hera's secret garden of the Hesperides and pick 3 golden apples from the little apple tree that Mother Earth had given Hera for her wedding gift. Nereus, the old gray man of the sea, was the only one on Earth who knew where the garden was, but he would not reveal the secret. When Heracles seized him to squeeze the secret out of him, Nereus tried to escape by changing himself into all kinds of animals. But Heracles held on to him, and at last Nereus had to tell him that the garden of the Hesperides lay west of the setting sun, not far from where the Titan Atlas stood holding up the sky. On his way to the garden, Heracles heard the groans of the Titan Prometheus, who was chained to the Caucasus Mountains. Heracles was in a hurry, but he felt sorry for the Titan and took time off to tear apart his chains. Zeus, impressed by the strength of his son, let him do it. In gratitude, Prometheus warned Heracles not to pick the golden apples himself, or he would die. They were apples of immortality and could be picked only by a god.